The story begins long after it has already ended. A man named Henry Townsend is dead. Not in the dramatic final chapter sense. He dies near the beginning, leaving behind a plantation, a wife, a set of ledgers, and a legacy so knotted in contradiction that the very earth around his home seems unsure whether to hold him or spit him out. Henry was a black man who owned slaves. That truth is laid bare quietly without moral theater. And from that point on, nothing in the novel will ever again offer the comfort of clean lines. It was this unraveling of expectation that first struck me because you brace yourself when you open a book about slavery. You think you know where the pain will come from, but Jones refuses that predictability. He shows you how systems of cruelty are not only inherited, but sometimes chosen, adopted, and passed down, not just by the powerful, but by those who once suffered under them. The plantation becomes not just a site of violence, but of mimicry. Henry becomes not a monster, but something harder to process, a man shaped by what he admired in the white men who once owned him. Henry's father, Augustus Townsend, bought his own freedom and that of his wife, Mildred. He carved dignity out of a brutal world. He worked as a skilled furniture maker, and he sent his son to the white man who had once enslaved him to apprentice. This white man, William Robbins, is not romanticized. He is cold and calculating, but he teaches Henry the business of slavery with the same precision one might teach carpentry. And Henry, eager to be respected, to be important, to belong to the known world of influence, absorbs the rules without resistance. I remember pausing here, not out of judgment, but out of discomfort. What does it mean when liberation is used not to reject power, but to replicate it? What does it mean to rise in a world designed to keep others beneath you and then to choose to keep them there? This is not a story with villains you can hate cleanly. It is not a tale of good and evil with clear sides. It is a story of rot, slow, polite, institutional rot that seeps into everything. And it's told with such calm grace that you feel it tightening around your heart before you even realize what's happening. After Henry dies, it is his wife, Caldonia, who must hold the house together. She is also a free black woman, educated, graceful, respected. And she continues to run the plantation. She continues to keep people enslaved. There is a moment, a quiet one, when she walks past one of the enslaved men and speaks gently to him, even warmly. And it is in that moment you feel the real horror. She thinks she is kind. She believes she is benevolent. And yet she never once questioned the chains. That kind of moral blindness is more terrifying than cruelty. The deeper I read, the more I understood that the novel wasn't simply exposing the institution of slavery. It was exposing the entire psychological framework that sustains cruelty, the justifications, the rituals, the normalization of suffering. And the way these things are not only protected by the powerful, but internalized by those who are trying to survive within the system. You begin to see how freedom and ownership get entangled, how people mistake proximity to power for protection, and how quickly compassion can be traded for stability. The narrative moves in time like memory, not in order, not in neat arcs. It drifts and circles. We learn what will happen long before we see how, but that only makes the impact sharper. Because knowing what's coming doesn't make it easier, it makes it heavier. You carry the deaths before they occur, you hold the betrayals before they unfold, and you begin to ask yourself questions that have no clean answers. What does it mean to survive? What does it cost to belong? Every character in this book lives under the weight of those questions. There's Moses, one of the enslaved men Henry trusted to manage the others. He starts to see himself as something more than owned, starts to believe he is chosen. But power, even the illusion of it, is a poison. Moses eventually believes he deserves more than his place, and his hunger, born of decades of deprivation, becomes a kind of madness. You want to blame him, but you can't because you feel the rawness in him, the need, the desperation to be someone in a world that has always told him he is nothing. And this is what Edward P. Jones does so masterfully. He refuses the reader the comfort of condemnation. No character is simply good. No one is purely evil. Everyone is warped by the world they live in. The system lives inside them. Long after it's been named, the pain I felt reading this book didn't come from witnessing violence. It came from recognizing complicity, from seeing how easy it is to want comfort even at the cost of someone else's freedom, from seeing how the desire to be safe, to be accepted, to be known can lead people to perpetuate the very things that once nearly destroyed them. That pain doesn't go away when you close the book. It lingers. It scratches at your sense of righteousness. It whispers to you when you start simplifying history into heroes and villains. It reminds you that evil isn't always loud, and that sometimes it looks like order. Sometimes it looks like a ledger. Sometimes it wears your name. The longer you stay inside the world of this novel, the more it unspools like a thread being pulled from a fraying garment. At first, it holds its shape. A plantation, a widow, a system. But then slowly it starts to come apart, not in spectacle, not in flames, but in the quiet unraveling of human certainty. The illusion of control slips, and you begin to see the rawness beneath it. Caldonia tries to maintain the order Henry left behind. She believes herself measured, civilized. She writes in her journal about the weight of leadership, as if she were a queen administering justice instead of a woman overseeing bondage. But you can feel the gap between her language and her reality. She speaks of responsibility, but what she practices is denial, and this is where the novel cuts deepest, in showing us how language is used not just to excuse cruelty, but to transform it into something palatable, something rational, something necessary. Moses, Henry's trusted overseer, steps deeper into the role of enforcer. He begins to visit Caldonia at night, offering her sympathy, stability, even seduction. What starts as a power move slowly turns into obsession. He believes perhaps that love will unshackle him. That proximity to Caldonia might deliver him into manhood, into freedom, but this hope is dangerous, and it is rooted not in love, but in hunger, for status, for ownership, for something that makes him more than just a body on a ledger. But Moses, in his attempt to climb upward, loses himself. He begins to believe in a version of freedom that is indistinguishable from dominance. He enforces the rules more harshly than Henry ever did. He punishes those beneath him, and when he is finally caught trying to escape with Caldonia, or at least from her orbit, he is punished not as a symbol, but as a problem that must be solved, and no one mourns him. Because in the end, Moses became exactly what the system designed him to be, a tool. Disposable, once broken. Watching Moses fall is excruciating, not because he is innocent, but because you can see what he could have been if he had been allowed to become human outside of hierarchy, if he had been nurtured instead of measured. There's something about his downfall that feels inevitable and unbearable at once, like watching someone drown in a river that used to be their only source of water. And then there is Sheriff Skiffington, a white man who believes himself fair. He insists he treats his own slaves well. He considers himself just. But this imagined morality begins to crumble the more he is forced to confront the chaos left in Henry's wake. He wants law, he wants balance, but when that law is built on injustice, what does balance even mean? Skiffington is the portrait of liberalism without integrity. He wants the world to be decent without ever disturbing the foundations of its indecency. There's a scene so brief you could almost miss it, where he stands in his office holding a piece of paper with the names of the escaped. He isn't angry, he's disappointed. And in that disappointment is the full weight of a man who wanted his system to be orderly, not cruel. But order built on violence always leads back to chaos. He becomes overwhelmed. He begins to lose control. And still, he cannot name the problem for what it is, because naming it would mean undoing everything he's built his identity upon. And all the while, the land itself seems to remember. The roads where people vanish, the fields where children are born and buried, the homes built by hands that were never allowed to rest. The soil of Manchester County carries the stories that its people tried to forget. Edward P. Jones doesn't give us a romanticized South. He gives us something more terrifying, polite, functioning, brutal machine. And then he lets us see it from every side. I started to feel the weight of the novel, not as a narrative, but as a map of trauma, not linear, not even clear, just a web of stories, overlapping, echoing, repeating. And the more I read, the more I saw how the system of slavery wasn't just physical, it was philosophical, psychological, intimate. It lived in relationships, in hopes, in rules, in love. And once that rot enters love, what is left? One of the enslaved women, Loretta, loses a child in the night. She had no warning, no illness, just silence. And the next day, she is forced to keep working. There is no ceremony, no mourning. And what broke me wasn't just the cruelty. It was the normalcy of it. How easily the others adjusted. How the rhythm of the plantation refused to pause for her grief. That was the moment I realized that suffering here wasn't an exception. It was woven into the schedule. And yet even in all this, there are flickers of resistance. A boy runs, a woman refuses to speak, a ledger is altered, a prayer is whispered, small acts, barely visible, but they shimmer. Because in a world built on the erasure of will, the smallest act of defiance becomes enormous. The novel doesn't give you the satisfaction of catharsis. There are no sweeping speeches, no dramatic uprisings, just the slow, relentless unraveling of a world built on contradiction. The people who tried to imitate power are left hollow. The people who tried to survive are left broken. And those who watched it all happen, those who told themselves they were better than the worst of it, are left with nothing but shame dressed up as righteousness. And I kept thinking, what if this is not just about the past? What if this is a mirror? Because how often do we participate in systems we know are unjust just because they offer us safety? How often do we speak of kindness while benefiting from cruelty? How often do we look away? Not because we don't know, but because we do. This is not just a story of a county in Virginia. This is a story of every place that ever decided it was easier to stay known than to be right. Time folds in this book. You begin to notice that Edward P. Jones doesn't treat chronology the way most novelists do. He glances forward, whispers what will happen decades later, then returns to the present scene as if nothing happened. It's not a trick, it's a form of mercy. Because by the time some of these characters suffer their worst, you already know they will someday find a moment of peace, or never find it at all. You carry their endings before their middles have even begun, and that weight changes everything. You read differently when you already know how someone dies, or what kind of person they'll become. You see not just their actions, but their trajectory. It's as if Jones is saying, don't judge them yet. Wait until you've seen how the world chews them up. Wait until you understand what made them twist into who they are. And maybe even then, don't judge, just look, just witness. That's the shape of the final chapters, not of climax, but of consequence. Caledonia tries to hold her plantation together after Moses is unraveling, but everything starts to fray. One of her enslaved women escapes. A child goes missing. The ledger begins to look more like a list of losses than a record of power. She writes in her journal, but the words feel thinner now, as if even she no longer believes them. The weight of ownership becomes too much, not because she grows a conscience, but because the system no longer rewards her for maintaining it. Without Henry, without Moses, without order, she begins to slip. Her authority had always been borrowed. Now, the lender has come to collect. What makes it haunting is that Caldonia never changes in the way stories usually expect women to change. There's no revelation, no fiery speech. She simply becomes what the system made her, a symbol of its slow decay, and somehow that feels more honest. Not everyone escapes. Not everyone grows. Some people just remain. The Sheriff Skiffington faces a slow erosion too. His ideals cannot hold the center. He starts to realize that his law cannot accommodate justice. That fairness in a slaveholding society is an illusion, and that his own complicity is not a mild tarnish on an otherwise good man, but the very mechanism of harm. When chaos reaches his door, he responds with silence, with withdrawal. He had built his life on a fragile balance, and the novel shows us what happens when that balance inevitably breaks. There are characters who leave, there are characters who stay, but very few are truly free. Even the ones who escape are never released from the ghost of what they endured. They carry it. It shows up in their children, in their quiet, in the way they flinch at kindness. There's a moment where a freed man walks past the plantation he once labored on and simply looks at it, nothing more. But in that glance, you feel decades collapse because you know that place still lives in him, stitched into his muscles, his nightmares, his silence. By the final pages, the world of the book has hollowed out. Many of the characters are gone, some by death, some by distance, some just disappear, and Jones lets them go. He does not chase them into tidy endings, because real history rarely gives you closure. What it gives you, if you're lucky, is the shape of what was. The damage, the resistance, the ache, and maybe, if you're paying attention, a warning. I closed the book and didn't move for a while. Not because I was stunned, but because I was heavy. The kind of heavy that comes when you realize you've been carrying more than a story. You've been carrying questions, ones that don't let go just because the reading ends. What do I accept because it benefits me? What cruelty have I normalized because naming it would cost too much? Who has paid for my comfort? The known world doesn't offer release. It offers recognition. You see the world it describes and understand that its logic still lives. In systems, in laws, in neighborhoods, in privilege, you understand that ownership didn't vanish. It just evolved. That ledgers became algorithms, that bodies are still currency, and that complicity still wears the face of kindness. Edward P. Jones doesn't scream with this. He just shows it gently and patiently, like someone guiding your hand over a scar and saying, see, this never fully healed, and you feel it, not in your brain, in your chest. You walk away from this novel not knowing what to do, but knowing you can no longer pretend not to see. That is its gift and its burden. And maybe that's the whole point of literature like this, not to make us feel good, not to give us lessons wrapped in bows, but to show us a mirror that doesn't flatter, a mirror that says, this is the world we've made, this is the world we live in. Do you see it now? And once you do, what will you carry forward? And what finally will you refuse to carry anymore?